The future of Greenland will be decided solely by the people of Denmark and Greenland, not by threats, not by military force, not by anyone who thinks territorial sovereignty is negotiable. Canada stands with Denmark, and we're opening a consulate in Nuuk to make that position unmistakably clear. That was Mark Carney speaking in Paris, January 6, 2026, standing beside Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen at the Canadian Embassy, hours after Donald Trump renewed threats to annex Greenland by military force if necessary. Not diplomatic language, a direct repudiation of American territorial ambitions in the Arctic. For decades, Arctic geopolitics operated on an unspoken understanding. The United States was the dominant power. NATO allies like Canada and Denmark deferred to American leadership on regional security. Russia was the adversary everyone coordinated against. And Greenland, the massive island between North America and Europe, existed in a comfortable limbo as Danish territory with American military presence. Then, Trump decided Greenland should belong to the United States. He appointed a special envoy whose job is explicitly to make Greenland part of the United States. The White House declared that military force remained an option for annexing Danish territory. Suddenly, Arctic geopolitics wasn't operating on gentlemen's agreements anymore. Carney didn't just refuse to support American claims, he actively sided with Denmark against the United States. He's sending Canada's indigenous Governor-General and Foreign Affairs Minister to Greenland in February to open a consulate. He's coordinating Arctic security with Nordic countries while explicitly rejecting American territorial demands. He's building a coalition of NATO allies who are treating American threats to Greenland as threats to the alliance itself. Tonight, we're showing you how Canada just chose Denmark over the United States in the Arctic, how Trump's Greenland threats backfired into the strongest Canadian-Danish Arctic partnership in history, and how what started as American territorial ambition became the catalyst for shutting the United States out of Arctic coordination it assumed it would always lead. But before we explore this development, if you value comprehensive analysis of this caliber, hit that like button and subscribe to remain informed on the developments that genuinely matter. Greenland's strategic value. Greenland is enormous. 2 million square kilometers, 80% covered by ice, home to 56,000 people, mostly Inuit. It's been Danish territory for centuries, gaining increasing autonomy over recent decades while remaining part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Strategically, Greenland is invaluable. It sits between North America and Europe with direct access to Arctic shipping routes. The United States maintains P2Fix Space Base, formerly Thule Air Base, which houses critical radar systems for North American missile defense. Greenland's position makes it essential for monitoring Russian and Chinese activity in the Arctic. Economic potential. Economically, Greenland holds massive rare earth mineral deposits essential for batteries, electronics, and defense systems. As Arctic ice melts, offshore oil and natural gas become accessible. The mineral wealth alone is estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Trump's renewed push. Trump's interest isn't new. He floated buying Greenland during his first presidency. Denmark politely declined. He dropped the idea. But in his second term, with American nationalism intensified and Arctic competition accelerating, Trump revived the annexation push, this time with explicit threats of military force. The official justification. The White House claims this is about national security, deterring Chinese and Russian expansion in the Arctic, ensuring American access to critical minerals, protecting NATO's northern flank. What Trump actually revealed. But here's what Trump actually revealed. He believes territorial sovereignty is negotiable if you're powerful enough, that allies like Denmark should simply accept American demands, that military threats against NATO members are acceptable if framed as strategic necessity. Denmark heard something different. The United States cannot be trusted to respect its allies' sovereignty. If America will threaten Denmark over Greenland, no NATO ally is secure from American territorial ambitions. Carney's unprecedented response. Most Canadian prime ministers would have attempted diplomatic hedging, express concern about rhetoric, call for dialogue, avoid explicitly choosing sides between the United States and Denmark, try to maintain relationships with both. Carney did the opposite. Direct support for Denmark. He publicly sided with Denmark against the United States on Danish sovereignty. He used the phrase, solely by the people of Denmark and Greenland, language that directly rejects any American claim. He announced Canada is opening a consulate in Nuuk, Greenland's capital, in February, a concrete action backing Denmark. The Governor-General's mission. And critically, he's sending Governor-General Mary Simon to Greenland. Simon is Inuk. She previously served as Canada's ambassador for circumpolar affairs and ambassador to Denmark. Her presence sends multiple messages. Canada recognizes indigenous Greenlanders' right to self-determination. Canada has deep Arctic ties through indigenous peoples. Canada is not deferring to American leadership on Arctic indigenous issues. Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand will accompany Simon to open the consulate. This isn't a symbolic gesture. This is cabinet-level diplomatic engagement explicitly supporting Denmark while Trump is threatening annexation. Carefully chosen language. Carney's language was careful but unmistakable. He emphasized self-determination of nations, sovereignty, territorial integrity as basic principles. He said Canada will always support Denmark's sovereignty and territorial integrity, which includes Greenland. Every word was chosen to contradict Trump's position. Self-determination means Greenlanders decide, not Americans. Sovereignty means Denmark's authority is legitimate, not negotiable. Territorial integrity means borders cannot be changed by force or threats. Denmark's recognition. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen recognized exactly what Carney was doing. She thanked him for being very clear in your statement when it comes to respect for national sovereignty. She emphasized both countries are into securing the Arctic region, and together with all our NATO allies, we can secure the region. Notice the phrasing, all our NATO allies, not led by the United States, together as equals with sovereignty respected. The European coalition. Carney wasn't alone. France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, and the United Kingdom issued a joint letter with Denmark and Canada defending Greenland's status. The language was direct. Greenland belongs to its people. It is for Denmark and Greenland, and them only, to decide on matters concerning Denmark and Greenland. This is extraordinary. 7 NATO allies publicly rejecting American territorial claims against another NATO member. No diplomatic hedging, no attempts to find middle ground, just flat rejection of American demands. The NATO warning. The European response sent a clear message. Trump's threats to Greenland are being treated as threats to NATO itself. Frederiksen warned explicitly that American annexation of Greenland would spell the end of NATO. European leaders are taking that warning seriously. Trump assumed European allies would stay quiet or offered token objections while ultimately deferring to American power. Instead, they coordinated a unified response that isolates the United States diplomatically, and Canada is at the center of that coordination. The new Arctic security architecture. Carney met privately with Frederiksen in Paris before the Ukraine Security Summit. They used that bilateral meeting to coordinate Arctic security approaches that explicitly exclude American territorial ambitions. The signal is unmistakable. Canada and Europe are building Arctic security cooperation that works around American demands rather than following American leadership. The collapse of American leadership. For decades, Arctic security meant American leadership with allies following. The United States had the largest military presence, the most bases, the dominant strategic position. NATO Arctic policy was effectively American Arctic policy with consultation. That model just collapsed. When the United States threatens to annex Allied territory, allies stop trusting American leadership. They start coordinating independently. They build partnerships that exclude the threatening power.
Carney and Frederickson emphasized working together as NATO allies to secure the Arctic, but they conspicuously did not mention American leadership or coordination with Washington. The subtext is clear. Canada and Denmark will work with European NATO members on Arctic security, and the United States is no longer assumed to be leading that coordination. The Nordic Canadian Arctic Bloc. Canada is also deepening ties with Nordic countries. Finland and Sweden recently joined NATO, bringing serious Arctic capabilities. Norway has extensive Arctic experience. Iceland provides strategic positioning. Combined with Denmark and Greenland, there's an emerging Nordic-Canadian Arctic bloc coordinating independently of the United States. Geographic control. This bloc controls critical Arctic geography. Greenland commands the North Atlantic approaches. Iceland sits astride key shipping lanes. Norway monitors the Barents Sea. Canada owns the Northwest Passage and Hudson Bay approaches. Finland and Sweden add Baltic and northern Scandinavian coverage. If these countries coordinate Arctic security without American leadership, the United States loses its dominant position in the region, not because of military defeat, but because allies simply chose to work around American aggression.
The indigenous dimension. Sending Mary Simon to Greenland was brilliant strategic positioning. Greenland's population is predominantly Inuit. Canada's Governor-General is Inuk. The message is that Arctic indigenous peoples have transnational connections that transcend state borders. The message to Greenland. If Trump tries to annex Greenland against the will of its indigenous population, he's not just violating Danish sovereignty, he's attacking indigenous self-determination. And Canada is signaling that indigenous Arctic peoples will have Canadian support against American aggression. This resonates powerfully in Greenland. Greenlanders have spent decades building autonomy from Denmark while maintaining the relationship. They're proud of their indigenous identity and protective of their self-governance. American threats to simply absorb Greenland into the United States ignore and insult that indigenous identity. Simon's visit says, Canada recognizes Greenlandic indigenous rights. Canada respects indigenous self-determination. Canada stands with Arctic indigenous peoples against external threats to their sovereignty. The message to Canadian Arctic communities. It's also a message to Canada's own Arctic indigenous communities. The Canadian Arctic has significant Inuit populations. If Canada abandoned Greenland to American annexation, Canadian Arctic indigenous peoples would wonder if they'd be similarly abandoned under pressure. By standing with Greenland, Carney signals to Canadian Arctic communities that Canada takes indigenous sovereignty seriously, even when it means defying the United States. What Trump got instead? Trump wanted Greenland. Instead, he got a unified European rejection of American territorial demands, 7 NATO allies publicly opposing the United States on territorial sovereignty, Denmark threatening that American annexation would end NATO, Canada opening diplomatic facilities in Greenland specifically to support Danish sovereignty. The coordination he triggered. He also triggered exactly the kind of independent Arctic security coordination that undermines American regional dominance. Canada-Denmark Nordic cooperation that doesn't defer to American leadership. Indigenous Arctic networks that transcend state boundaries and reject American claims. European allies treating American Arctic ambitions as threats rather than proposals to accommodate.
The lost trust. Any lost trust? Frederickson, Carney, and European leaders now know the United States under Trump will threaten Allied territory. That changes everything about how they approach security cooperation. If America threatens Denmark over Greenland, Canada has to consider whether America might someday threaten Canadian Arctic sovereignty. European countries have to plan for American unreliability on fundamental issues like territorial integrity. The damage isn't reversible by backing down or softening rhetoric. The trust that NATO allies would respect each other's sovereignty is broken, and once broken, it doesn't heal just because the threat temporarily recedes. Building around American unreliability.
What comes next is Canada and European allies building Arctic security architecture that assumes American unreliability. Joint exercises between Canada, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and Sweden. Coordinated Arctic patrol programs that don't include the United States. Intelligence sharing networks that treat American demands with skepticism. Infrastructure coordination follows similar patterns. Churchill Port development with European partnerships, Arctic shipping route management between Canada and Nordic countries, critical minerals supply chains structured around Canada-Europe cooperation without American intermediaries. The economic implications are substantial. If Canada coordinates Arctic resource development with Europe and Nordic countries instead of the United States, American companies lose access and influence. Rare earth minerals from Greenland, critical minerals from Canadian Arctic, shipping through Northwest Passage, all potentially structured through partnerships that bypass American involvement. And the precedent matters globally. Other allies watching Trump threaten Denmark learn that American security guarantees are unreliable. If the United States will threaten NATO allies over territorial disputes, what value is the alliance? Countries start building alternative security arrangements that don't depend on American commitment. Trump wanted to demonstrate American power by claiming Greenland. He demonstrated American unreliability, and Carney ensured that demonstration was unmistakable by publicly siding with Denmark, coordinating with European allies, and building Arctic partnerships that explicitly exclude American territorial ambitions. Greenland isn't becoming American territory, but the Arctic is becoming a region where American leadership is optional rather than automatic. And that shift from American dominance to multilateral coordination without American control is the real strategic loss Trump's threats created. Canada chose Denmark. Europe backed that choice, and the Arctic just became a place where the United States no longer assumes allies will follow its demands. Trump is shut out, not by military force, not by economic pressure, but allies simply deciding they'd rather coordinate without him, and discovering they can.